Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Foodie Friday Cook With Me. Fall is finally upon us. It may not feel like it where you live. I totally recognize that, especially from all my friends back in Vegas. I know it's been really hot there, but here it's been in the 70s, absolutely beautiful, and fall is finally here. Football has started, we're back in school, and it's time to do some fall goodness. So today we're gonna be whipping out some delicious mini bites for football Sundays. We definitely like to watch football here in our house. My husband is from Texas, so of course he is a natural born Cowboys fan. And we're gonna be making some food that is delicious pub style finger foods. First and foremost, we're gonna be making a fan favorite here in my house, that is tachos, or tater tot nachos. They're absolutely delicious. We're also gonna be making a Monte Cristo slider. If you've ever had a Monte Cristo, it is a delicious ham and turkey sandwich that has been deep fried, covered in powdered sugar. It's phenomenal if you've never had one. This is an easy way to make them for a crowd, and you don't have to fry anything. It makes it much easier. We're also gonna be making a copycat of the Chili's queso dip. So their skillet queso dip. We love the Chili's queso dip. It is delicious. It's a fan favorite as well. And then the last thing we're gonna be making is something my kids literally lose their mind over when they hear I'm making it, and that is banana pudding. So this one is an easy recipe that feeds a crowd. I make it all the time. My kids love it. And we're gonna top it all off with a delicious and easy raspberry lemonade margarita. So we got a lot on our plate today. Let's go ahead and get started. To get started on our tachos, we are going to cook our tater tots. So I'm starting with a sheet pan, then I'm going to line it with some tin foil. Now this part isn't necessary, however, I feel like it's a twofold. It makes the cleanup a heck of a lot easier, and it also kind of crisps up your tater tots a little bit more. So spray it really well with Pam so that your tater tots don't stick to it. And then I'm using this big bag of tater bites that we purchased at Price Chopper. And normally, if I were really making this for a big crowd, which typically I would be, however, it's the weekend, which means half my children have scattered. I'm only going to be making about half the bag, but if I were making this for everybody, I typically would make 2 trays, which would give us leftovers. There is nothing better than some tachos in the morning, fried up in the pan with a drippy egg on top. So don't be afraid of leftovers. They taste delicious. But for today, we're just going to make 1 sheet because, like I said, half my children are gone. My teenagers have significant others and they're always away. So for this weekend, we're only feeding the little people. So we're just going to make 1 sheet. So make sure that they are in a single layer. You don't want any that are laying on top of each other. Otherwise, they won't cook evenly. And then pop them into the oven based on the directions on the bag. Okay, so we've got our tater tots going in the oven. You wanna do that first so that they have plenty of time to crisp up. While that's going, we're gonna get started on our banana pudding so that can get into the fridge and start to cool and harden, well, not harden, but stiffen. And then we're gonna get to working on the sandwiches. For our banana pudding recipe today, we're going to be using chessman cookies instead of vanilla wafers. If you've never had a chessman cookie, it is a delicious, crispy butter cookie. They are to die for. It's like a shortbread cookie, so very good. Similar to the ones that you might find in those little tins, but absolutely delicious. They're addicting, and they've got these cute little chess players on them. In the spring, you can find them with flowers and birds and butterflies, and for the holidays, they do change them up. So keep an eye on them because you can always find them, decked out for the holidays. So we're using a 9x13 dish, and we are just lining the bottom of the dish with the chessman cookies. Now, they're not going to fit perfectly, as you see here. It just kind of breaks them up here at the end, but it does typically take 1 whole bag of chessman cookies to line the bottom of your pan. Kind of spread them out, get them going. Next up, we're going to use bananas. So You want nice ripe bananas for this. Look for those that have been browned a little bit. It's okay if they've got a little bruising on them. You're not going to see them, but you want them really sweet and completely ripe. So make sure that they are not yellow at all and that they're incredibly easy to cut through. Otherwise, they're going to just add a little bit of a bitter flavor to your banana pudding, and that is not what you want. Now, the recipe that I have followed forever calls for 6 bananas. However, I always go a little over the top because I like a lot of banana to go with a lot of pudding. This recipe does make a lot of puddings, so I'm also going to use this really cool banana slicer that I have. We actually purchased this on Amazon as a joke for my children because they like to cut up their fruit when they eat it. And so my sister-in-law had bought this little banana slicer for my boys to make it easier, and it actually really is incredibly easy. So I'm just using this. I'll put it in my Amazon storefront in my kitchen section, but this part is completely unnecessary. You can just use a knife. This just makes things go super fast, as you can see here, and it's a fun tool to use. So the little banana slicer there, we're just slicing those up. You want them in bite-sized pieces, and then you want to just layer them on top of your chestnut cookies. Again, using the amount of bananas that you prefer. Next up, grab another mixing bowl, and we're going to make our vanilla pudding. So for this, you're going to use a 5-ounce bag, and which is typically like the family size. And you're going to make the pudding by doing just the pudding packet and then 2 cups of cold milk into your pudding mixture. It may say something different on the package. To be honest, I've never looked. This is just what the recipe calls for. And then you're going to get a whisk and you're going to mix that up. Now, it's not going to stiffen immediately, but it does go very, very quickly. So just stir it up there, let it start to stiffen, and then put it off to the side to let it finish developing. In another mixing bowl, you're going to do 1 whole 8-ounce cream cheese. You want to make sure that this is softened, so leave it out on your counter for a couple of hours so that it gets nice and soft. It just makes it easier to mix. If it's stiff, it doesn't blend and get creamy. So that's really important that you pay attention to making sure that it gets soft. We're also going to use 1 whole can of sweetened condensed milk. This is one of the small cans. So this has 14 ounces of sweetened condensed milk. And sweetened condensed milk is such a great tool when you're cooking or baking. It also makes a really delicious homemade coffee creamer. So if you ever run out of coffee creamer in your house, but you have some sweetened condensed milk, which I always have, it makes a delicious coffee creamer in a pinch. So, and then you're also going to blend that together. So I'm just grabbing my mixer. You want to make sure that it's nice and creamy because this is going to be the filling of your banana pudding. And you might be thinking, well, why did you use banana pudding? Because the banana flavor is going to come from your actual bananas. We're not doing any artificial banana flavor today. And I actually think that keeps it really fresh and delicious tasting. So mix up your cream cheese and your sweetened condensed milk until they're nice and creamy. And then you're going to add in your vanilla pudding, which, as you can see there now, it is completely developed and nice and stiff. Go ahead and add that in, and then again, just mix it nice and creamy. Make sure that you get all the bits mixed in there. It doesn't take much. And then we're going to add in our final ingredient, and that is Cool Whip. Again, Cool Whip comes in the freezer section, so you want to make sure that you let that come to room temperature, let it soften, not room temperature, but let it soften up and defrost. And this recipe calls for about 12 ounces of whipped topping. However, I can only find it in 8 ounces or like 16 ounces. So I didn't use the entire container. I just used what I needed. And then you're going to use a plastic spatula to just fold that whipped cream in. You don't want to stir this or blend this because you'll lose the fluffy texture. Just make sure you're folding it in. And then you're just going to go ahead and top this on top of all of your bananas. It does make a lot of puddings, so just make sure that you are careful as you're putting this in, and then spread it out across the top of your bananas. Get it nice and into a thin, or not a thin layer, but an even layer, definitely not thin.
And then you're going to add the final piece, which is your chessman cookies. Again, you're going to use one whole package to put chessman cookies across the top. And when you serve this, typically what ends up happening is a serving is one whole chessman cookie size. And it ends up working out perfectly. So go ahead and line out your chessman cookies and your pudding is going to be ready to go. Once you have all of your cookies onto your pudding, go ahead and top it with a little bit of plastic wrap or some kind of topping there. If you've got a lid, you could do that too. I just used some plastic wrap right across the top, and then you're going to pop it into your refrigerator to let it stiffen up before it's time to eat.
Okay, so our banana pudding is done. It's in the fridge, it's stiffening up, and that's gonna be ready to eat here soon. I've also taken out our tater tots. They were done, I could smell them. They were nice and brown and crispy, so they are on top of the stove. We're gonna come back to those here in just a minute, but first things first, we're gonna get our Monte Cristo sandwiches in the oven. And to make those sandwiches, you're gonna start with Hawaiian rolls. Now, if you have never had a Hawaiian roll, which I'm sure that's probably not true, unless you're in a place where they don't sell them, but Hawaiian rolls are a delicious sweet roll. They're sweetened with pineapple juice. They're absolutely delicious. They don't taste like pineapple, but they are so very good. And they're the perfect size for a little slider because they're nice and small. They make a perfect little burger. And they're excellent. So today we're gonna be using them for a sandwich, and we're actually gonna be baking the sandwich. So it's gonna be yum and warm and gooey. So let's go ahead and get started.
For our Monte Cristo sandwiches today, we're going to get started with our Hawaiian rolls. Now you're just going to need one package, but if you need to make more, you can do two. And you're going to take the entire packet, the entire rolls out of the package, leave them all connected, and then cut them in half while they're still connected. I'm using a bread knife here to just cut the top off, and then that's how you're going to put them into your baking dish. I am using a brownie dish today, but you can use any kind of dish that you like. We're going to start with some Dijon mustard, and you're going to spread that all across your sandwiches. Now, again, in typical Tiffany fashion, it calls for about half the amount of Dijon that I'm using right now, but we like a lot of flavor. I don't like my sandwiches to be dry, so I'm definitely putting on more than it calls for, but that's what we like. If you're like me and you like a lot of flavor in your food, definitely double what it says to use in the recipe, because it's just not enough. It's never enough. You always got to do more, right? And as the saying goes, if I am extra, if I'm too much, there's always somebody out there that's less. So if you don't like that much, that's okay. There's going to be somebody out there that does less. We're going to be using baby Swiss today for our sandwich. You can find this in your cheese section in your grocery store. And you're going to put down 6 cheese slices to begin with. So just layer those out, and that'll be our first layer of cheese. I'm just kind of making sure that they're evenly spaced here, so ends up kind of being a double layer. And then we're going to start with some honey ham. So you can use honey ham from the deli if you want. That's what I would prefer. However, the line at the grocery store was crazy when I went, and I did not want to wait. So we're just going to put down a layer of honey ham. I am doing a layer of 2 slices, but again, that's up to you. You could do just 1 slice if you like. And then we're going to add in some turkey breast. I'm using oven roasted turkey breast. You can use whatever you prefer, but I feel like this one has a gentle enough flavor. It's not smoky at all, so it doesn't compete with the rest of the flavors in the sandwich. So go ahead and do another layer of the turkey. Again, I'm doing 2, and I think that's just the right amount of meat. When you're done, it does give you a nice hearty sandwich. And then you're going to top it with another 6 slices of the baby Swiss. When you're done with your toppings, you're going to go ahead and put the top of your sandwiches back on. And now we're going to make our topping. So for this, you're going to use 4 tablespoons of butter. You're going to put this into a glass mixing cup, and this will allow you to pop it into the microwave. You want to melt that. You don't want to get it too hot, so kind of let it sit for a second. And then you're going to add in 1 egg. Mix this up really, really well. Make sure that it's nice and creamy. If your butter is too hot, it will scramble your egg a little bit, so just be careful. I'm mixing it today with a little plastic spoon, and then once that's nice and creamy, you're going to pour that all across the top of your sandwiches. This is what gives your sandwiches a little bit of a French toast flavor, and this is in lieu of frying it. So a traditional Monte Cristo sandwich is a fried sandwich. You dip it in something similar to a pancake batter, and then you fry it, and it's absolutely delicious. So this gives us the same idea without dipping it and frying it. So make sure that it's covering your entire sandwiches. Make sure that every inch of the tops are covered. So I'm just spreading it across the top. And this is going to be absolutely delicious when you eat it. You're probably thinking this looks bananas, but I promise you it's delicious. Once you have it completely spread out all the way across your sandwiches, you're going to grab some tin foil and you're going to loosely cover your sandwiches. This is going to allow the insides to bake evenly. We're going to bake it like this, and then at the end, we're going to take it out and take the tin foil off and bake it for a little bit longer. So pop it into a oven that's been set at 350 degrees for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back to it. Next up, we're going to make our queso dip. We're starting with a block of Velveeta cheese. This, I believe, is a 15-ounce block of Velveeta cheese. Go ahead and get it open and into your saucepan. Have your heat on about medium heat, and then you're going to add in 1 can of Hormel chili with no beans. This is going to be the base of your queso dip, and it's absolutely delicious. It does have really great flavor, and again, no beans. Make sure you grab the one with no beans. You could probably do it with the one with beans, but we prefer the no beans. I just think it is a better flavor for this dip. Go ahead and mix those together, and you're going to want to let your cheese melt, and you don't want it to sit too still so that you don't fry your cheese. Make sure you're using a non-stick skillet so that way nothing is sticking to the bottom, and just keep moving it around until your cheese has melted. Next to it, you'll see another skillet there. I am cooking up some bacon in there. That is for our tacos. So I've let this kind of sit a little bit. As you see, the cheese is starting to melt. That's what you want it to look like, and just keep stirring so that everything is coming together as the cheese melts. And then we're going to add in the seasonings here in just a little bit. While that is coming together, we're going to go ahead and check on our sandwiches. I had taken off the cover to these sandwiches a little bit ago, and here they are all finished. So you cook them for 15 minutes with the tin foil on, 10 minutes without it, and they come out absolutely delicious. Now we're coming back to our dip, and we're adding in 1 cup of milk. For this, I'm using whole milk, and you're just going to stir that in until it's completely blended. It might seem like it's going to be a little bit too watery, but the Velveeta does stiffen back up as it cools. So you definitely want to make sure that you have a good amount of fluid in your dip so that it doesn't get too stiff. So just stir this around until it is combined. It will combine, it just takes a little bit. And then we're going to season it up. We're going to start with chili powder. You need 2 teaspoons of chili powder in your dip. Next up, we're going to add in paprika. Again, another 2 teaspoons of paprika for your dip. And then the final seasoning that you're going to add is cumin. So for the cumin, you'll only need about 1/2 teaspoon. So toss in what you feel like you need. If you like it a little smokier, you can add a touch more, but this really is the perfect recipe. You're not going to need to salt or pepper it because it definitely has enough of that already. So just stir it until it's combined, and then you can lower down your heat and keep it warm until you're ready to serve. You could also serve this in a crock pot to keep it warm. Now we're going to work on our tachos. So I've had my cheese out, and we're going to grate about 1 whole 8-ounce package of cheese and another half of a package, maybe even a whole. I think I could have used a little bit more, but typically I think 2 packages of cheese would be appropriate. So just shredding the cheese and then adding that shredded cheese to the top of the tachos. They are nice and warm. I had just taken them out of the oven, and we're going to pop them back in once we have all of the cheese evenly spread across the top. So again, this is something you can use whatever kind of cheese you prefer. I'm using the aged sharp cheddar, the Vermont sharp cheddar from Cabot. That's what I like to use. That's what I always use. And now we're going to chop up our bacon. So I had cooked an entire package of bacon, and I had to taste it to make sure that it was okay. And you're going to go ahead and chop that up into little bite-sized pieces, and then we're going to sprinkle that across the top of our tachos. You want it to be nice and even and easy to eat, so make sure that you cut them into small bite-sized pieces and then sprinkle those across the top. And again, you're going to pop this back into your oven. I have it set at 350, and I left it in for probably another 5 to 7 minutes to let everything warm up and melt. Now I'm going to plate our dip while that's waiting. And I got this really beautiful tray here from Walmart along with that beautiful bowl. Both are from Walmart. I think both are from Better Homes and Gardens. And I'm using the lightly salted on the border chips. These are absolutely delicious. They're crispy and buttery and perfect. While our tater tots are finishing up, we're going to go ahead and make our topping. You're going to use about 4 to 6 ounces of sour cream, and we're going to add in ranch. You want to add in a pretty good amount, about the same as 1 whole package of ranch seasoning. It's up to you how much you like. Because I have it in a different dispenser than a package, I just kind of do it to taste. I eyeball it, taste it, see if that's what I like. And then we're going to set that to the side. We're also going to dice up some green onion. Don't skip this part. This part gives it a really delicious final flavor, brings it all together, gives it something fresh and a little bit of a crispy bite when you eat your tachos. I've now taken out our tachos from the oven, and I've added them to this platter. This platter is actually from Hobby Lobby. I found it in their fall section. And we're going to go ahead and add our sour cream to the top. Just kind of spread it out, and then you can use your spatula, or like here I'm using a wooden knife, and you can just kind of spread it out across your tater tots, and it will, with the heat of the tater tots, it will just kind of melt into everything and be absolutely delicious. You could also have a little bit on the side for people to dip if they like a little bit more of the sour cream. Once you have that fully spread out across your tater tots, you're going to sprinkle on your scallions or your green onions. Again, don't skip this part. It does add a really delicious fresh flavor at the end. And again, you could have some to the side for people to put more if they like it, but it is delicious and nobody skips this part in my house. Finally, it's time to plate up our Monte Cristo sandwiches. So I'm just using my knife here to cut them because we hadn't done that before. Make sure you cut all the way through because you have those 2 layers of cheese as well as the ham and the turkey. So you're going to want to make sure that you cut all the way through to the bottom. And then I'm just using a elongated platter. You guys have seen this one in almost every one of my videos. I love this platter. It's from Home Goods. And we're going to lay these out and just kind of stack them on top of each other. Final touch for our Monte Cristo sandwiches is a sprinkle of powdered sugar, and typically you would have a bowl with some blackberry preserves or raspberry preserves to dip. However, I had forgotten that piece. We're now going to make our raspberry lemonade margarita. We're starting off with raspberry lemonade. Give it a really good shake, and you're going to put this, as much as you want in your cup, probably, I don't know, close to a cup, I would say. And then I'm adding in 2 ounces of silver tequila. And then I'm also adding in about a half an ounce of triple sec. Once you have that all in your glass, make sure you stir it up really well. You could put this in a shaker if you prefer. Just stir it up really, really well. And then for some garnish, I'm adding in some fresh raspberries, just a few, and our margarita is ready to go.
Okay, my friends, I've got my plate made. I'm ready to dig in. I want to start with the Monte Cristo sandwich. So yummy. Sweet, salty. Normally I would dip this in a blackberry preserves, and I forgot to get it at the grocery store. Make sure you dip yours in it. It takes it over the top. Let's go ahead and try our nachos. So good. I've already been eating about a pound of the dip. Let's take a sip of our margarita. It is pretty strong. If you don't like yours that strong, you can do 1 ounce of tequila, half an ounce of triple sec if this is too strong for you. Finally, we're gonna go ahead and try the banana pudding, even though I already know what it's gonna taste like and how delicious it's gonna be because I make it all the time. So good. The chessman cookie, that's where it's at. Once you make your banana pudding with a chessman cookie, you will never go back. The buttery deliciousness of a chessman cookie just takes it over the top. Okay, my friends, that is it for our Foodie Friday Cook With Me this week. I am excited to go sit down and watch the ball with my family. I hope that you enjoyed these recipes. I'll have them all linked for you down below. The ones that I have a recipe for, the other ones like the nachos, those I just kind of wing it. So I'll have that recipe for you down in the description box. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. If you try any of these recipes, tag me on Instagram or let me know here on YouTube. And until the next one, my friends, happy eating. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another Cook With Me video. In today's video, we're gonna be focusing on a fall breakfast brunch style. I'm so excited to share this with you. I'm gonna be sharing my absolute favorite pumpkin bread recipe, as well as a delicious dupe for the Cracker Barrel hash brown casserole. If you've never had this, you are in for a treat. It is delicious and very addicting. We're also going to be sharing our family's recipe for sausage and biscuits. That's sausage gravy with biscuits. And I'm so excited to share all of these goodies with you. Might also have to be a mimosa in there while we're enjoying our brunch. So let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna start today by making the pumpkin bread. I'm sorry, I almost said banana bread. That's what I'm so used to making. Now this recipe I have had since I first got married. It's on my little index card here. It is literally so beat up. I've had this forever. In fact, I don't even really remember where I got it. I wanna say maybe I got it from a magazine, but to be honest with you, I don't remember, but it's really old. I'll make sure that I'll have all of the ingredients listed for you down below. I'm gonna go ahead and get that made first and get that in the oven, and then we're gonna make our casserole, so that's baking at the same time, and then we're gonna get started on our sausage gravy. So let's get going.
Okay, to get us started today, I am grabbing a large mixing bowl. I get questioned a lot about these mixing bowls. I actually got them on Amazon. Well, I put them in my Amazon wish list and they were purchased by my husband for a Christmas gift. I'll have them linked down in my Amazon storefront for you. They do come with 4 mixing bowls. I love them. Like I stated though, I'm starting with a large mixing bowl, 3 cups of sugar. I just added in the oil. I believe it is 1 cup of oil. And I'm adding in the eggs. So the recipe calls for a cup of egg substitute, which I don't like to use. So I'm using 4 regular eggs. That's the equivalent. I'm going in with a whisk to mix that up really well. Next up, you're going to add in your pumpkin puree. The recipe calls for 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree. However, I only had large cans. So what I'm doing is loosely measuring this out in a 1 cup measuring cup to give me approximately 15 ounces. 1 cup is 8, so 2 cups is 16. And I loosely packed it in there, so I'm sure I'm around 15. Also calls for, 2/3 of a cup of water. I did use water from my refrigerator, so it's filtered. I do have well water and I'm not really crazy about how it tastes, so I always try to use water from my refrigerator. Then you're going to grab another bowl and you're going to mix your dry ingredients here. So for this recipe, you're going to need 3 cups of flour. I'm using a 1/2 cup scoop, so it'll appear like I'm doing a little bit more. We've got 6 scoops there instead of 3, but that's because I needed 3 cups of flour. And then I'm going to add in the baking powder. Calls for 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 2 teaspoons of baking soda. I have a large thing of baking soda here because it's great for 100 different things. And I'm also going to add in the salt. It does call for 2 teaspoons of salt. So just want to make sure you salt it pretty well. That's what helps to bring out all the other flavors in your bread. And then it also calls for seasoning. So our seasonings for this bread is a teaspoon of nutmeg, a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves, as well as a teaspoon of allspice. I was actually out of allspice, so I did skip that part. But I have since gotten more so that I can make more. It did not alter the taste though, I will say. So if you don't have it, don't panic. Next up, go ahead and add your dry ingredients into your wet ingredients. And then again, with your whisk, you're just going to mix that together. Now you don't want to over mix this because it's going to make your bread kind of gummy and a little chewy. You want to keep it really light. This is a pretty wet batter, so don't panic if it feels like maybe it's a little too wet. That's exactly how it's supposed to be. It is an incredibly moist bread, so it does have a pretty watery or soft batter. It's also incredibly delicious, so make sure that you lick the whisk. It is so worth it. Next up, you're going to grab 3 loaf pans and make sure that you give them a good spray so that nothing sticks. And you're going to divide your batter into the 3 loaf pans. Now, these are around 7x3 loaf pans, I think. The one in the middle was a gift that I got for Christmas. It's my absolute favorite baking item. However, the other 2 are ones that I've had forever. And you just want to make sure you get all of the batter. Although I did leave a certain amount left over in the bowl for the rest of us to enjoy because it is so very delicious. But just go ahead and make sure that you scrape out as much as you possibly can. And as you can see there, I made quite a mess. So once I get these kind of flattened out, I'm going to grab a paper towel to clean off my loaf pan here so it doesn't burn and smoke in the oven, because that does not smell very nice and I don't want that to get into my bread. Go ahead and pop this into your oven again at 350, and you're going to need to bake it for around 45 minutes. Just check it around 45 minutes, and if you need to, put it in a little bit longer depending on your oven, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Now we're going to get started on our hash brown casserole. This is seriously such a staple in my house. My family loves this. You're going to start off with 32 ounces of frozen hash browns. You're going to make sure that they have sat out and thawed a little bit, so you don't want them, to be frozen. I also have a garbage bowl there. Don't panic. I wasn't tossing leftover scraps into the same bowl as the hash browns. It's actually my garbage bowl. And I am cutting half of an onion. You're going to dice this up and add this to your hash browns. Now, you don't need to saute your onion. It will bake in the oven. However, if you don't like a ton of onion flavor, you can saute this first, or you can completely omit this part, use a little bit of onion powder to get the same flavor. But we love the onion in this recipe. It's so delicious, and it just adds such a depth of flavor to your hash brown casserole. If you like onion, do not skip this part. It is very, very worth it. Now you're going to add in 1 stick of melted butter, so 1/2 cup of melted butter, and you're going to salt this up a bit. It's up to you how much you put in. You can always go back and add more. And now you're going to add in 1 can of cream of chicken soup. So go ahead and open this up and get that in there. This is what gives it its signature flavor. So 1 can of cream of chicken soup without any water or anything, because you're going to be adding in some other items of seasoning here. You're going to also add in some sour cream. That's what I'm opening now. So the recipe does call for a cup of sour cream. So that is what I'm adding in, is about a cup. I think it's a cup. Maybe it's 2. You have to check the recipe. It might be 2 cups. Go ahead, or maybe even a cup and a half, but go ahead and stir that all together. Try not to make the mess that I made. I was just a little overzealous and my mixing bowl was slightly too small. But I do love this mixing bowl because it's nice and deep. And typically it's the perfect size, but this was more than I remembered. So go ahead and give that a good mix. Make sure that everything is combined to the best of your ability before you add in the next ingredients. We're going to season this up a little bit more, but you're just want to combine that soup and the sour cream as much as you can before you move on to the next parts. Make sure that your onions are all mixed in, and keep scraping the sides so that you're not missing any of your hash browns. And this is going to be so good, you guys, I promise. My secret ingredient, of course, to anything is a little bit of Lowry seasoned salt. So I add a little bit of that and top it off with some freshly ground pepper and give it a really good mix, and your potato casserole is ready to go into the oven. So I'm going to make sure that those last seasonings are completely combined, and I'm actually completely forgetting the biggest ingredient, and that is the cheese. I forgot that we have to add that in. So I'm gonna cut about enough to get us about 1.5 cups of grated cheddar cheese. Now, if you're new to my channel, I always use Cabot Vermont sharp cheddar cheese. It's absolutely delicious. So even though this is white, it is a sharp cheddar. It is my favorite cheese. It has a really great bite to it. It's salty. It's so delicious. So if you've never had this, I would highly recommend it. I know there's a lot of people who love Tillamook cheese, but this honestly is 100 times better than Tillamook cheese. It's so delicious. Hopefully you can find it in your area, but again, Cabot Vermont sharp cheddar. So you're going to need about 1 cup to 1.5 cups of a shredded cheddar. It's really up to you. If you like a little more, a little less, you can adjust. This is not baking. It doesn't have to be a perfect science. You just want to make sure you give it really good flavor. And the cheese is just going to help it be bubbly and melty and oh so good. So give that your final stir. Make sure that all of your ingredients are completely combined. I keep scraping my spoonula here so that way, I'm not preventing anything from stirring together. And your potatoes are starchy, so your hash browns, so things might stick a little bit. So just make sure that you are, giving them a really good stir. Next up, grab yourself your favorite casserole dish. I'm using this 9x13 casserole dish that I got from Target. It might not be 9x13, maybe 12x7. It's a little bit smaller, but I did get this at Target from the Threshold line. It was only $15, which I thought was a great price for a good piece of bakeware. So it's actually stoneware, which is really great. So I did spray it down just a little bit before adding in our casserole. And finally, I'm just going to top it with a little bit more black pepper. I like a lot of black pepper on my food. And now we're going to take it over to the oven and we're going to pop it in with our bread, again at 350. You're going to bake this for about 45 minutes, the same as your bread. While that's cooking, we're going to get started on our biscuits and gravy. I'm starting with a saute pan here on the stove with about 1/2 stick of butter. We're going to let that melt and get warm and bubbly. And while that is melting, I am going to dice up the other half of our onion. And we're going to saute this for the base of our sausage gravy. Now, there's lots of different ways and lots of different recipes to make biscuits and gravy. However, this is my adaptation of my husband's family's recipes. So they do their biscuits and gravy a certain way. This is my adaptation of, their version of that. So we're going to start by sauteing this half an onion, making sure that they get nice and translucent and delicious and sweet. This is the best way to start any kind of gravy or any kind of sauce. I love to put onion in pretty much anything. It really does just add a depth to your food that you're cooking. It just is so very delicious. So if you're not used to adding sauteed onion or onion into things, I would highly recommend it because it is so good. While the onion is sauteing, we're going to go ahead and get our biscuits onto our sheet. Now, here's what's up, guys. This is where I cut some corners. I am all about keeping things simple and yet super delicious. So I go the semi-homemade way. I could make some homemade biscuits, but that was not going to happen. I wasn't rolling anything out and all that good stuff. So these are perfectly great. These are the Pillsbury Grands biscuits. These are the ones we always use, and they get pretty big and they're delicious. So I'm just spraying down this pan, even though it says you don't have to. I always do. And we're going to get these prepared to go in the oven. That way we can do one at a time so that they're not crowding the space, and we'll be ready to enjoy these when our gravy is done. Once our onions are done being sauteed, as you can see here, we're going to get started with our roux. So a roux is just butter and flour that you've cooked for a minute or two that you're going to use as a thickening agent for your gravy. So as you see here, I added 2 tablespoons of butter and I'm just giving that a good stir. You're going to let that cook for a minute or so. It is going to thicken up and turn into a bit of a paste, but you just want to cook it for about a minute or so that way it cooks out that starchy flavor. Then you're going to add in 2 cups of whole milk. You could use skim or 2% if that's your jam. We use whole milk here in this house because that's just how we roll. And I'm using a spatula to just kind of break up our pasty roux, and we're going to allow this to thicken. Put your stove down to like a medium low and just let that simmer for a little while. It will start to thicken as you go. We're also going to season it up with some freshly ground pepper, of course. I just finished telling you how much I love freshly ground pepper. And we're also going to add in a little bit of garlic powder and just a touch of onion powder as well. While that's cooking, we're going to start on our sausage. So I'm using 2 pounds of regular Jimmy Dean breakfast sausage. You can use whatever kind you would like. You could even use a turkey sausage if you prefer, but this is what we're using. And again, I'm making a lot because there's 7 of us. However, you don't have to make this much. You could just go with 1 pound of the breakfast sausage if you prefer. I'm using a meat, I don't know what you would call that, meat grinder, I don't know, that tool first just to kind of break it up. And then I'm using a wooden spatula. And then I did just kind of prop the lid on top there so it doesn't splatter on my backsplash. And as you can see, our gravy on the other side is thickening up and getting, perfectly delicious for us to add in our sausage. And while that's cooking up, I'm just going to go ahead and put some items away, clean up a little bit. And just like that, our sausage is almost all the way done. Once it is done, we're going to go ahead and add this to the gravy pan. So I'm not actually going to drain this. I'm just going to use a slotted spoon to drain as I go, add it to our gravy, and then I'm going to give it a taste and just season it as needed. Like I mentioned, I'm going to add a little bit of onion powder and garlic powder and a bit of salt, and it's going to be ready to go. So as I'm stirring up my gravy, I'm noticing that it's a little bit thick, so I'm going to add in some more milk. This is something you can do after the fact. Try not to add too much at the beginning because you can't thicken it back up once you have it all mixed together. You can't add more flour. It will just get cakey and it'll taste really starchy. So don't add flour after the fact. Make it thicker and then you can thin it out versus the other way around. So I'm just adding in a little bit of milk until it makes it, thin enough to spread across our biscuits like a gravy. And that's how my husband prefers it. He likes it a little bit more on the gravy side versus a thicker side. So that's what we're doing here. And because I added a bunch more milk, I'm just going to season it up a little bit more, like I said, with onion powder, garlic powder, salt, and pepper. And this bad boy is ready to go and looks so delicious. Just like that, it's time to take out our delicious hash brown casserole. It was bubbly and crispy on the edges and just absolutely perfect and ready to be devoured. Our pumpkin bread was also done, so I took that out in just a second here. And while I was about to take that out, I popped in our biscuits. And we're going to do one sheet pan at a time. That way we're not overcrowding the space and it'll be good to go. I'm also giving our gravy another stir, just letting it thicken up a little bit after we added more milk. And then we're going to turn the heat off and let that just kind of sit while we finish up some other things. We're also going to make some scrambled eggs. We like a lot of scrambled eggs here in my family. I grew up eating a lot of eggs. My grandfather worked in an egg ranch in Southern California, and he always had like, I don't know, 3 or 4 dozen eggs in his house at a time. And I just grew up enjoying eggs in all different ways. And I like for my family to enjoy them as well. They're such a great source of protein. So I'm just adding them to a bowl here. Usually if I'm doing like a big Sunday breakfast or so, I usually make a dozen eggs for us because there's so many of us and we usually have extras, but extra people. So that's what I'm making here. I'm just doing a whole dozen eggs. I'm going to give them a really good stir and whisk and just kind of whisk some air into them. Also going to add a little bit of salt and pepper. That's how we like our eggs. And then we're going to season them up a little bit more towards the end. Now, I don't add any other kind of fluid to mine. I don't add water or milk or anything like that. I don't like them too watery. I like them really fluffy, but it's up to you. You could always add something else if you like. The key to a good egg is low and slow. So keep your stove on really low and just constantly scrape the bottom and use like a soft spoonula like I was using before, like a rubber spatula, and you're just going to scrape the bottom, and that's what's going to allow for your eggs to be nice and fluffy. So if you see, I am just scooping across the bottom there, and I added some more of that cheddar cheese onto the top here. It just makes it absolutely delicious. You can skip that part. That's how my family likes it. We think it's really delicious, but that's up to you if you want to add cheese or not. Be very, very mindful of not overcooking your eggs. Eggs will burn very quickly, so if you notice that they're starting to really set up, turn off the heat and you can just let the heat of the pan finish cooking them. That's typically what I do. So I've turned it off here. My pan is nice and hot. As you can see, everything is steaming, and I'm just going to let those finish cooking by, sitting there on the stove. Now I'm going to go ahead and start prepping things for us to eat. I'm going to add my gravy into this gravy boat here, which ended up actually not really working out the way I wanted it to. The gravy did thicken up a lot, so we did end up just kind of spooning it on top of our food. It didn't really pour out of the gravy boat, but it still looked pretty and felt a little fancy, which is always nice. I also grabbed a platter here to put our biscuits on for everybody to enjoy. Not everybody adds gravy to their biscuits. Some people just come for the casserole and add a little jelly to their biscuits. It's up to them. We're also going to dish up our eggs into this bowl. That last platter that you saw in this bowl here, the last platter is from Walmart. This one is from Target. I try to just pick these up, maybe 1 or 2 a month. That way I just have them. It's always good to have a lot of serving dishes. You never know when you're going to need them. And it's much more affordable to grab one, when you're shopping versus several at a time. Now I'm going to dish up our pumpkin bread. So remember, this recipe makes 3 loaves. And what I will say is that my family went through all 3 loaves in one whole day. Everybody loves this for breakfast, for a snack, and for a late night treat. It's absolutely delicious and so very moist and yummy. So I'm going to give this a good little slice. We're going to get it plated up on this other platter, and it's going to be time to eat.
Okay, my friends, our fall brunch is ready to go. I've got my plate all plated up here. I've got my biscuits and gravy along with my cheesy scrambled eggs and the hash brown casserole, which is to die for, as well as my pumpkin bread, which I festively put in this little pumpkin crock. I like mine with butter on it, so that's up to you. And then I also have my mimosa ready to go. I did use a sparkling wine versus a champagne. This is a sparkling Prosecco. It's really, really delicious, so that's up to you and what you like. Some people don't like champagne, it gives them a headache, so maybe try this sparkling wine. But let's go ahead and have a good taste. I definitely am starting with the hash brown casserole because it's my favorite. It's cheesy and oniony and delicious. Let's go ahead and try our biscuits and gravy now. Full disclosure, I don't normally make this. This is normally Danny's job. I think I did pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and wash it down with a little sip of my mimosa. So good, so bubbly. And now let's go ahead and try our pumpkin bread. This is the most moist pumpkin bread I've ever had. I think it's because it calls for a large amount of oil and a lot of egg, and so it keeps it really, really moist on the inside, but it is absolutely delicious. That butter is melted and soft on the top, so. All right, that brings us to the end of this video. My family has literally come in here probably 10 times asking when breakfast is done, so I've got to be done with this filming and let them eat. I hope that you enjoyed this fall brunch cook with me video. This was fun, and this is something we would make on a weekend morning. It's absolutely delicious, so I hope that you give it a try. If you do, make sure that you tag me on Instagram at Charlotte Grove Farmhouse, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Happy eating. Hello my sweet friends, and welcome back to another Cook With Me Foodie Friday video. In today's video, we're gonna be making a fall favorite here in my house, and that is this delicious vegetable hot pot with a yummy, delicious, cheesy scone that you bake on top. This is a huge favorite here in my house. However, it only comes out during the cold seasons, and it is now chilly enough most days for us to whip this meal together. So I am fresh home from work, still in my work attire. It is about 4 o'clock here. We're gonna get dinner started before soccer and dance and all the crazy things we have going on. This meal is a little bit more involved. However, it is a favorite, so I try to do it when I can, and I wanted to share it with you. So let's go ahead and get started.
First thing we're going to do today is roughly chop 1 onion. You're not going to finely dice it, just make sure that you're chopping it into smaller bite-sized pieces. And you're also going to get your oven preheating at 350 degrees. Today's recipe comes from my favorite vegetarian cookbook. I've had this since I was in high school. I know that sounds really crazy, but there was a short period in my life where I was a vegetarian, and this recipe is one of my absolute favorites. I still make it all the time. You can add a protein if you want. I don't think it's necessary, and we love it just the way it is. Once you have your onion roughly chopped, you're going to move over to your stove. You're going to need some kind of pot that you can transfer into the oven. So I'm using my Dutch oven today. Go ahead and get it going on medium-high heat and get some olive oil warming up, and then you're going to saute your onions until they are translucent and sweet and delicious. Saute those in a little bit of olive oil, maybe a tablespoon or two. And in a little bit, we're going to also add in some garlic. So I never really follow the recipe all the way. If this is your first cooking video with me, you will learn that I kind of just do things on my own. So the recipe calls for 12 ounces of carrots. I used 6 large carrots that I peeled and roughly chopped. I also used 2 leeks. It calls for 12 ounces of leeks, trimmed leeks. However, I ended up just using 2 and only using the stem of the leek. And then it also calls for a pound of potatoes. So I've got 5 peeled russet potatoes there that we're going to also chop up. And it also calls for 8 ounces of mushrooms. So I did just grab 1 package of already sliced mushrooms to keep my life a little bit easier. When you're chopping your vegetables for this recipe, make sure that you keep them large. You're going to be boiling this on the stove and then transferring it into the oven, and it's going to bake for almost an hour, both without our scones that we're going to add to the top and with our scones. So if you notice here, I am cutting my carrots into bite-sized pieces, but they're large. They're not bite-sized yet, they're bigger, but once they soak and they boil and they bake, they're going to get tender, and you want them to be able to hold up to all of the cooking that we're about to do. If you make them too small, they'll disintegrate when you're trying to eat them or into your hot pot. And this recipe, although it is more like a stew, it's definitely more of a hot pot where you want these items to be able to be the main focus. So there's not going to be a meatball or, chicken or anything like that in this recipe. These are going to be your large pieces that you're eating out of your hot pot. So keep your vegetables nice and large so that they can withstand all of the cooking they're about to do. And just remember that you do have your onions cooking on the stove. So I did kind of neglect mine a little bit, and I had my heat up a little bit too high, which you'll see here in just a moment, but it was perfectly fine. I didn't burn any of my onions. It was just the oil that was burning a little bit, but it still tasted fantastic. Once your onions are pretty much cooked, go ahead and add in some garlic. So the recipe does call for 2 garlic cloves. Definitely did a little bit more than 2 garlic cloves. I'm using minced garlic today that's already prepared. That's probably about 3 garlic cloves, but we like a lot of garlic in this house. Go ahead and cook that until it's fragrant, and then you're going to add in your vegetables. Now, I will mention that the one vegetable I didn't have on hand today was celery. I had used it the night before for some clam chowder and forgot that I had bought it for this recipe, but that's okay. It was perfectly fine without it. So add in your vegetables, add in your mushrooms, give them a good stir, and you're going to let those cook for a few minutes just to kind of take off the edge a little bit before we move on to the next step. Next up, we're going to add in our first seasoning, and that's chili powder. You're going to add in a teaspoon of chili powder. Just sprinkle that across the top, stir it in, and let that cook for a couple of minutes. So that way it kind of just cooks into your vegetables. Now we're going to add our thickening agent. So we're going to add 1/4 a cup of regular all-purpose flour to our vegetables, and go ahead and stir that in. You want to let that cook for a minute or so just to kind of cook off the starchy taste. But this is going to allow for the liquid in our recipe today to thicken and make our hot pot really stewy and delicious. More like a vegetable chili, if you will. And then we're going to add in our liquids today. We're using chicken broth. However, the recipe does call for vegetable broth or vegetable stock. So if you have that, you can use that. Like I said, today we're using actually chicken stock, not broth. I'm so sorry. And the recipe calls for 2.5 cups. So that's what I'm starting with. However, I always add in more vegetables than the recipe calls for. And so I do end up adding in more fluid. So that way our vegetables are completely covered by the stock. But I don't want you to start by doing that unless you put in more vegetables like me. Next up, we're going to open up 1 can of diced tomatoes, which we're going to add to our pot, as well as some tomato paste that we're going to add to our pot. This is going to deepen the flavor of our hot pot and make it absolutely delicious. So go ahead and toss in your 1 can of tomatoes that are diced with the juices, and then add in about a tablespoon of your tomato paste and get that stirred in. The next seasoning is optional, and that is thyme. You can use fresh thyme if you have it. I'm using ground thyme, about 1/8 teaspoon or so, just to give it a little bit of flavor. And now you're also going to add in some salt. Make sure that you use a liberal amount of salt when you are when you're seasoning this, because all these vegetables are going to need a good dose of salt, and we're really not using anything that has a lot of sodium. I used low sodium chicken stock, so make sure that you're seasoning those vegetables up. Otherwise, this is going to have a very bland taste. And in a little bit, we're going to taste it and season it up a little bit more. But for now, this is what we're starting with. We can always add in more, so I try not to overdo it. And now I'm noticing I need to add in a little bit more stock. So I'm adding in about another 1/2 cup just to give all of my vegetables a good cover before we're sticking it into the oven. Now you're going to go ahead and turn the heat up, put your top on, and let that come to a boil before we add it into our oven. And while that's going, we're going to get started on our cheddar chive scones. So this is probably the most delicious part of this entire recipe and what takes it over the top. So you're going to start with 1 stick of softened butter and put that into a mixing bowl. I'm just using this mixing bowl here from TJ Maxx that I found. And now you're going to use you're going to use self-rising flour. So this is really important because it has all the other ingredients that you need. So you're going to need 2 cups of this. Do not scoop your flour directly into your 1 cup measuring cup. Use a spoon and put it into your cup. That way you don't get too much flour. These can get really, really stiff if you over flour them. While that was happening, my vegetable hot pot did come to a boil, as you see here. I'm giving it a good stir, and then we're going to pop it into the oven at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes. And this is going to allow for all those vegetables to completely soften and cook through and just bubble up and get so delicious. My mouth is watering. But while that's cooking, we're going to finish up our scones. So you're going to want to go ahead and cut in your butter into your flour. Now, I don't have a pastry cutter, so I'm just using my fingers, pinching the butter into the flour until it's all combined to the best of my ability. I really do need to get a pastry cutter. I have a antique pastry cutter, but it's not one that I would ever actually use. It's pretty rusty, but your fingers are perfectly fine if you don't have that tool. Now you're going to shred in about 4 ounces or half of an 8-ounce block of cheddar cheese. I'm using Cabot Vermont Sharp. You can use whatever you prefer. If you would like to have that orange color of the cheddar cheese, you could use, a different one. And you can use pre-shredded as well. This just is so much fresher in my opinion. It keeps your cheese really fresh. So you're going to add in, like I said, about 4 ounces of cheddar cheese to your scones. And your next ingredient is going to be chives. So for the chives, you're going to need about a tablespoon or so. And I'm just trimming those in with my kitchen shears. And this is the easiest way to add any kind of chive into a recipe. So I'm just trimming these in. And then we're going to get this mixed up, and it's going to make a delicious flaky scone. So a scone, if you've never had one, is a buttery pastry, if you will. However, this is not sweet whatsoever. So when I say pastry, I don't want you to think that it's sweet, but it's like a crusty topping, if you will, for a hot pot. Now we're going to add in 3 tablespoons of milk. The recipe says we can use up to 5, and we do end up using all 5, but start with 3 first. Get that mixed in. You can use your pastry cutter here if you want, but your hands work really, really well. Just move that around. Once you have that combined all to the best of your ability, go ahead and add in another tablespoon or 2 if you need it. For me, I definitely needed the other 2 tablespoons of milk, so I'm going to go ahead and add those in now, and this will be just the right amount of liquid to get our dough completely combined, and it will come together in a nice neat ball, which will allow for us to roll this out and get it cut into our scones.
All right, my friends, so the lights are on now. It is getting super dark. It is now about 5:20 or so, and everybody is kind of just scrambling around trying to get ready to go. So we've got about 7 minutes left on our hot pot that is in the oven. I'm gonna go ahead and roll out our sconces, get those cut. Sconces. They're not a sconce, they're a scone. A sconce is the thing that you put in your house as a light. I was just catching up on some Instagram stories, and I saw somebody that I'm sure we both follow posting about sconces. So we are going to get the scones cut up and ready to go on top of our hot pot, and then it'll go back in the oven for a little while to get those baked up, and then it's gonna be delicious. It smells so good in here, so let's get those ready to go.
To roll out our scones today, I'm just adding a little bit more of that self-rising flour onto my counter. And I've got my rolling pin here. This rolling pin is great. It has those tools on the end there, those plastic rings that keep your dough all at the same size. So if you do a lot of baking of sheet cookies of any kind, this is a great rolling pin to have. I'll have it linked for you down below. It is from Amazon, and I love it. So I'm just rolling these out. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'm just making sure that they're all roughly the same thickness. And then we're going to cut them into triangles. So I'm going to be using a little wooden charcuterie knife today. It's also just a little wooden butter knife, and cut this into roughly similar sized triangles, which is what you're going to see me do right now. And this is going to allow for them to fit nicely all around our hot pot, and they're going to cook and become just so very delicious, just a warm and yummy crust to the top of our hot pot. once the timer goes off on your hot pot, go ahead and pull it out from the oven. And now we're going to add in our final ingredient, and that is 1 can of red kidney beans. Now you can drain yours if you prefer. I like to add the liquid into mine. I just like that little extra flavor of the bean, but this is completely up to you. Go ahead and stir those in. And now we're going to make sure that we've got enough seasoning on our hot pot. So if you notice, all of our vegetables have completely cooked and they are delicious. This is when I just come in and make sure that it's got enough seasoning, because nothing is worse than under-seasoned food. And once you have your scones on top, it's really hard to know if it's seasoned enough. So for mine, I'm just grabbing a spoon, giving it a little taste. I ended up adding in a little bit more salt as well as some seasoned salt, which just has some garlic in it and a little bit of paprika. So that's what I'm adding in now. I'm going to give that a really good stir. And then we're going to top it with our scones before putting it back in the oven. So if this is not enough liquid for you, you can add a little bit more in as well, but this is perfect for me. I'm just giving it another little taste to make sure that it's good. I didn't want a bean because we hadn't cooked them yet, but it tasted perfect. And now we're going to add in our scones. So just layer them across the top, kind of fit them in like a puzzle. You want them to be spread out across the top of your hot pot. And you guys, you have to try this recipe. It is so delicious. We have leftovers. I'm having it today for lunch and I cannot wait. This is just so very good. Once you have all of your scones on the top of your hot pot, go ahead and put it back in the oven, still at 350 without a top, and you're going to cook this for about another 20 minutes or so. I started mine at 20. You can check it then. If your scones aren't ready to go, you can add a few more minutes. However, mine was ready to go a little bit before my 20-minute mark, and it is ready to go, and it is time to eat. I cannot wait.
All right, my friends, the lighting is a little bit wonky right now, so we're gonna go ahead and try our dinner. I have my bowl all plated up. I'm ready to eat. It smells fantastic and it looks delicious. Now the scone is like super flaky and delicious and buttery with our yummy vegetable hot pot. Can you see the steam? Oh my goodness. Oh, it's so good. It's so good and so comforting. And that scone on top is just a buttery, delicious goodness that tops the entire thing. Also, don't knock it till you try it. Have yourself a blueberry muffin on the side. It's absolutely delicious. Kind of like when you have yourself a cinnamon roll on the side of your chili. Let me know down below if you're a cornbread or cinnamon roll kind of person, but try a blueberry muffin on the side of your vegetable hot pot. It is so good. So, okay, my friends, that is it for this week's Foodie Friday. I hope that you enjoyed this recipe. I would really recommend you give it a try. It is delicious and filling, and it just warms you from the inside out. If you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to give it a big thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe for new videos. I'd love to have you come back for more, and until the next one, my friends, happy eating. Hello my friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tiffany, and today we're gonna be making a really delicious, warm and comforting, creamy tortilla soup for those chilly fall nights. I know here in New England, we have been experiencing some pretty chilly nights. There have been some with even freeze warnings. And I know across the country, there has definitely been some snow already. So if you need an easy recipe, a weeknight recipe that you can make really quickly and affordably and can make your family feel warm and cozy from the inside out, this is the recipe for you. Today's recipe calls for cooked chicken breast. Now you can do this a number of ways. You can purchase the rotisserie chicken ready-made and just use that if you don't have the time, or if you want to just make things go a little bit quicker. You can also pre-cook your chicken breast, so if you're making something else earlier in the week and you want to make a little extra so you have some for this, you can do that as well. But today we're going to be utilizing my new air fryer. I did just recently purchase a air fryer that I have here on my countertop. It's one I've been wanting for a while. It is from the Drew Barrymore Beautiful line at Walmart. This is not sponsored, but had my eye on this bad boy for a while. I'm glad that I finally snagged one. So I'm gonna try to cook my chicken breast in my air fryer to see if that saves us some time, and we'll see how it goes. So while that's cooking in the air fryer, we can get the rest of our ingredients going, and hopefully we'll have this meal together in under a half an hour.
Okay, to get us started today, we are going to grab 2 chicken breasts. Now these chicken breasts are really thick, so I wasn't 100% sure how they would cook inside of the air fryer, so I just sliced them in half. I'm using a really sharp knife. This is the easiest way to get your chicken nice and thin. If I were cooking this on the stovetop, I would have cut this into at least 3 pieces, but in the air fryer, I figured just in half would be perfectly fine. I'm now going to layer them in a single layer in the air fryer bucket. I don't know what you refer to this as. I'm going to call it the bucket. And I'm going to season my chicken while it's here in the bucket. So I'm just going to season it with a good amount of salt. Chicken breast is very, very bland, so make sure that you are seasoning it really well. So I'm doing a good amount of salt, and then I'm also going to season it with some onion powder and some garlic powder, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. Once my chicken was fully seasoned, I'm just going to pop it into the air fryer, and I'm going to roast it at 400 degrees for about 17 minutes. And I did end up checking it halfway through. This was the perfect amount of time. Wait till you see how good the chicken comes out. Next up, I'm going to start off with 1 medium-sized onion. This is a little bit larger, but I did peel off the outside of it, so it did, end up as a medium-sized onion. And you're going to dice this up nice and small. This is going to go into your pan, so dice it how you like it. Do not leave this out. Onion brings such a delicious depth of flavor to a dish, so make sure that you leave this part in. For today's recipe, I am using my cast iron Dutch oven. However, you can use whatever, large stock pot that you have. So we're starting off with 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and we're going to let that melt at the bottom of our pan. I'm just going to kind of stir it around. I've got my stove on at a little above medium. And once your pan is nice and warm and you've got all of your butter melted, go ahead and add in all of your diced onion, and you're going to let that saute until it's clear and delicious. While that is sauteing, we're going to go ahead and prepare our beans. For this recipe, you're going to need 1 can of black beans, and you want to drain them and rinse them. Make sure that you give them a really good rinse. I'm just using a metal colander, and they'll be ready to go. As I was preparing those, I heard the air fryer finish, so I just took a little peek. We're going to leave that inside with the air fryer off until we're ready for it. Coming back over to the stove, we're going to just stir up our sauteed onions, make sure that they're getting a lot of movement. And now we're going to add in our garlic clove. So the recipe calls for 3 garlic cloves. I put somewhere around there, probably a little bit more. And it also calls for 1 jalapeno pepper. However, I left that out just because my family, I think, would never forgive me if I added that. Next up is tomato paste. We're going to add in 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. Make sure you stir that around and get it fully incorporated with the rest of your vegetables. And then we're going to add in our other items that come from the cans. So you're going to add in your can of black beans that you've drained and rinsed. You're also going to add in 1 can of corn that's been drained. And finally, 1 can of Rotel diced tomatoes with the green chilies undrained. Next up, you're going to go ahead and add in your stock. So for this recipe, you need 5 cups of chicken stock. I'm adding in 4 cups here with an additional cup on the side. It actually comes out to 1 box and a cup if you're using the box of chicken stock. Go ahead and give that a good stir, and that'll start to come together. Now we're going to season it up a little bit. So you are going to use some hot sauce. The recipe calls for 1 to 2 teaspoons of hot sauce. So just toss in as much as you prefer. You're also going to use some taco seasoning. The recipe calls for an entire packet, but you can start off with a little bit and add more as you see fit. I ended up using about 3/4 of the packet, not the whole entire packet, but that's completely up to you. Now it's time to prepare our roasted chicken to go into our soup. So I'm just adding the chicken into this large mixing bowl. I will tell you that the chicken was perfectly cooked. It was still nice and juicy. That was a perfect way of cooking it. And I'm just using my hand mixer here on high speed to shred up my chicken. This is the easiest way to do this job. Make sure that you peel apart any larger chunks by hand. You can remove any of the hard pieces on your chicken as it was roasting, so that way you don't have any of those hard bits in your soup. And then your chicken is ready to go. You're just going to bring that over to your soup and add that in, and then make sure you stir it so it's fully incorporated. Next up, we're going to add in some cream cheese. So for this recipe, you need about 1/3 cup of cream cheese that has been softened. This will take a little bit of time for it to fully incorporate, but just make sure you stir it so that it is melting appropriately. While that's going, you're going to work on your cheddar cheese. So for this recipe, you need 1.5 cups of shredded cheddar cheese. You're going to put some of that into your actual soup, and some of it you're going to use for the top of your soup. I am using Cabot's Vermont extra sharp cheddar. This is my absolute favorite. I use it in every one of my recipes that requires any kind of cheddar cheese. I think it's got a really great bite to it, and it's absolutely delicious. So completely up to you what you would like to do with that. But I'm adding in about 1 cup of the cheese. Go ahead and stir that in until it's nice and melty. And then I did reserve the rest of the cheese for the top of our soup. Now we're going to add in the last of our ingredients, and that is a pinch of cayenne pepper, which I was actually out of, so I didn't add that, and a teaspoon of cumin. Cumin is just going to give it that nice smoky flavor, so you'll add a little bit of that, and then I'm just making sure that this little bit of cream cheese that I had left was fully incorporated, so I just kind of broke it up a little bit and then made sure that it was fully mixed in. Now we're going to prepare our toppings for our soup. So you can really do whatever you want here. I am doing cheddar cheese as well as diced avocado and some chopped cilantro. And we also ended up using the Cool Ranch Doritos crunched up to top our soup, And you could use regular tortilla chips if you prefer. We just wanted something with a little bit more of a bite. We also topped ours with a little bit of sour cream and some fresh lime juice. I know cilantro is one of those seasonings that you either love or you hate. Where do you fall on that? Are you I love cilantro, or do you think it smells and tastes like soap? Let me know where you stand. We were having this debate this morning, and I love fresh cilantro. I think it's fantastic in any kind of Mexican cooking or Hispanic cooking. It is exceptionally good in this soup. If you like cilantro, make sure you put a really good helping on top of yours. It is so delicious. Because our soup came together so super fast and I really didn't have a whole lot of dishes, I decided just to really quickly wash them while I let the soup come to a boil and fully incorporate. So I'm just going to give these dishes a quick wash and we'll get our soup plated up. our soup has been simmering at medium-low heat for about 15 minutes, and we are ready to eat. Our beans are nice and soft. Everything is fully incorporated, and it's time to get this into our tummies. So I'm just going to get this plated up, and it's going to be time to eat. Like I mentioned, I chose to top my soup with a little extra cheese, some freshly diced avocados, some fresh cilantro, a little bit of extra hot sauce, as well as a splash of fresh lime juice. I also topped the soup with some crumbled up Doritos in the seasoning Cool Ranch, and I did end up adding a little bit of sour cream once I was off camera. I forgot that while I was on camera, but the mix of the fresh cilantro, the lime juice, and the Cool Ranch Doritos, it was just absolutely perfect.
Okay, my friends, my soup is done and it looks and smells amazing. I can't believe how quickly it got dark in here. I started this video with natural light, but man, I lost that really quickly. Gotta thank good old daylight savings. So let's go ahead and give this soup a try. I'm so excited. I have been so under the weather. Any kind of delicious soup is, you know, the way to go for me. Oh my goodness, it's so good. I put a little extra hot sauce in mine. Figured it would clean out my sinuses pretty well. That fresh cilantro and that little bit of lime on the top, so good. And honestly, I have to tell you, I'm so very impressed with how well the air fryer roasted our chicken. It was perfectly cooked. It took 15 minutes. It was so easy and the cleanup was fantastic. And I'm gonna use that now for every time I need to roast some chicken for sure. All right, my friends, that brings us to the end of another Cook With Me video. I hope you found this very quick and easy meal to be both delicious and motivating. I hope you give this one a try. I'll have the recipe linked for you down below. I promise you this will not disappoint, and make sure you use the extra hot sauce. It makes it super good and I hope you enjoy it. If you do try this recipe, make sure that you tag me on Instagram at Charlotte Grove Farmhouse. I would love to see how you enjoyed this recipe, and until the next one, my friends, have a great day. Happy eating. Hello my friends, and welcome to another Foodie Friday Cook With Me video. In today's video, we are doing real life cooking. Today is Saturday. It is insanely busy. We have back-to-back soccer games today, 3 in fact, and it is just insane. We're also prepping for my in-laws' 50th anniversary party next weekend, where we're hosting about 60 people. So definitely got a lot on our plate. So today we're doing a crock pot recipe. Kinda. We're making a delicious pot roast with a creamy mushroom gravy, and we're also going to be making delicious mashed potatoes on the side. So if you're here for it, let's go ahead and get started. To get started today, we're gonna get all of our items into our crock pot so that that can be cooking. Our beef brisket, or I'm sorry, our beef roast needs to cook for about 6 hours. It can go a little bit longer, but 6 hours on high at the bare minimum. So we need to get that in so that I can get to soccer ASAP.
First things first, we're going to dice up a medium onion. I'm using a yellow onion today, so I'm just going to go ahead and take off the skin, and then we're going to dice this into just small, pieces that are easy to eat. We're going to put this in with our roast, so it's going to get nice and soft. When you're cutting your onion, make sure that your knife is really sharp. So I am using a Wusthof chef's knife. I'll try to link it for you down below. If I forget, just let me know. But I purchased it at Williams-Sonoma. This is my absolute favorite knife. I use it every single day, pretty much every single time I do any kind of cooking. It is an expensive knife. I'm not going to lie. It's pricey, but it's worth it. It makes a huge difference when you're cooking, especially when you're doing something like this, because you're not going to have as much issues with your eyes watering if you're using a really sharp knife. So make sure that you're using a good knife and that you are keeping it nice and sharp, and you want to dice your onion really, really small. And then you're going to take this over to your crock pot, which I already have plugged in, and you're going to start by adding in a cup of water. And then we're going to add in some beef base. So you could use bouillon cubes if you want. I'm using a broth base here. I'm using about 1.5 tablespoons to 2 tablespoons just to give it some really good flavor. And then we're going to add in our onion. I'm sorry, it's out of focus right now. It'll come back, but we're going to go ahead and add in our onion. Next up, we're going to add in some mushrooms. So I'm keeping it really simple. I already bought sliced mushrooms just to keep things quick and easy. I did not have a lot of time, but you're going to add in 1 pound of mushrooms. So you could leave this part out if you're not a big mushroom fan, or put in half, but you definitely want to have the mushrooms. They're delicious. Then you're going to add in your garlic. You need about 2 tablespoons of minced garlic. So that's what I'm putting in there. We like a lot of garlic. So you guys know I like to keep stuff really flavored. So I put in a lot. Now you're going to get your roast. So I'm using a chuck pot roast today. You want about 2.5 to 3 pounds of roast. And I'm going to open this up and we're going to season it. So for this recipe, you don't have to sear your roast. However, if that's something that you prefer to do, you can. I'm not doing it for this recipe, but a lot of times when I'm making a pot roast, I will sear it first. But this one doesn't call for that, which is perfect because I don't have time for that today. I'm just using a little bit of salt and some pepper. That's all we need for seasoning because our broth is going to be very seasoned. So don't worry about adding any other seasonings to your meat. And then you're going to take this over to your crock pot and just add this in right on top of your mushrooms. This is what keeps your roast from burning because it's not directly on the heat. Go ahead and add in about 1 tablespoon or 2 of Worcestershire sauce directly onto the top of your roast. And then you're going to just pop the lid on and turn it on high. You're going to leave that on there for about 6 hours.
Okay, so we've got our beef roast in the crock pot, and now it's time for me to get out of here. So I will see you later on this evening in about 6 hours or so. Okay, my friends, it is significantly later in the day now. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we are gonna go ahead and get finished up with dinner so that we can get some food. We're gonna have a movie night and have some just downtime because Saturdays are crazy. So we've got our roast is still going. It smells phenomenal. I could actually smell it with the house completely closed. Well, they have the windows open, but like before we even walked inside the door, I could just smell that delicious smell of the roast. So I am so excited to eat. So while that's still finishing up, we're gonna go ahead and boil up some potatoes for a delicious mashed potato. And then we're going to shred our beef and we're going to thicken up our sauce to make a nice, delicious gravy. And I think we're also going to cook up some delicious buttered up Brussels sprouts and we're gonna eat.
First things first, I'm gonna go ahead and peel my potatoes. I'm using just a regular russet potato for today's recipe. I also really like to use red potatoes for my mashed potatoes. However, I could not find red potatoes that day. I just grabbed a bag of russet. I was in a hurry. However, if I were using red potatoes, I would do a rough peel, which just means that I leave some of the skin on. And I do that because I like a little bit of that texture, a little bit of that skin in my mashed potatoes. My kids are not the biggest fans of it, so for today, I'm just going to do a regular full peel of my potato. fell in the trash can there, but luckily I just put a brand new bag on, so it was okay. But I do like to leave a little bit of skin when I make the mashed potatoes for, myself or for Danny and I prefer it that way. And I do prefer it with red potatoes, but this is equally delicious. So we're just going to peel our potatoes and then we'll move on to the next step. To prep our potatoes for the water, we're just going to cube them. So I'm cutting them into equalish sized pieces in, just kind of a cube, if you will. I'm either quartering it or cutting it down to 6, depending on the size of the potato. But you want to make them a little bit smaller. This helps them cook faster, and you want to try to keep them as even in size as possible, so that way they cook about the same time. But this just helps keep your mashed potatoes moving faster. You can boil them, whole. That's not a problem. That is one way of doing it. But I always cut mine because I'm always short on time. We're going to move our potatoes over into the water. Now, I had already filled mine up. However, I had overfilled it. So I'm adding in my potatoes, and I'm noticing as it's coming to the top here that there's just way too much water. And that's an easy fix. So I'm actually just going to grab a cup and I'm going to pop it inside of the water, pull some out, dump it out, and just keep doing this until it gets down to a better height. And then I'll put in the rest of the potatoes. We'll put the top on, and we're going to let that come to a boil. While that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get a stick of butter to get started for our Brussels sprouts. Now, I've mentioned this before, you can do more or less of butter. I like a lot of butter with my Brussels sprouts, but it's up to you if you want to do this much or do less. They're absolutely delicious, totally buttered and seasoned up. Now I'm going to go ahead and take off the tips. I'm just going to cut those off. They're a little tough. You don't want to eat that part. But keep all of the little leaves as they start to fall off, because those are so delicious. They're going to crisp up when you're cooking your Brussels sprouts, and they are absolutely divine. In fact, my family and I, we fight over those little leaves. They're so good. So get these quartered up, and then we'll take them over to the stove. Now that our butter is completely melted, we're gonna pop in our Brussels sprouts. You're gonna cook these at about medium heat, and you want them to start to crisp up and get tender. You want the butter to kind of brown a little. It's absolutely delicious. I am actually, when I'm editing this right now, I'm like, man, I might need to make some Brussels sprouts for lunch because they are my favorite. They're so good and so delicious, and they're just amazing. Once they've been cooking for a little while, you're gonna season them up. So I'm seasoning them with onion powder, garlic powder, a little bit of salt and pepper, and then a little bit of Lowry seasoned salt is the last thing that you'll see me toss on. And that is just so that, you know, it gives it a full-bodied flavor. You can flavor them with anything or season them with anything that you would like. You could do a lemon pepper if you wanted. Honestly, anything is delicious, but this is how we eat them. And now I'm just gonna let them cook and brown up some more, crisp up and get really soft, and they'll be ready to eat. So delicious. While those are cooking, we're gonna move over into a pot now, and we're gonna work on a roux for our pot roast to turn the sauce into gravy. So I've just popped in a little bit of butter there. I think it's about 3 or 4 tablespoons. And then I'm going to add in 1/4 cup. I think it's 4 tablespoons of butter, 4 tablespoons of flour, which is 1/4 cup. And then you're going to mix this together until it's all combined. And you want to cook it for about 30 seconds to a minute, just to cook off the starchy taste of the flour. And once that's done, take it over to your pot roast here in just a second. So first we're gonna take our meat out of our crock pot, so that way it'll be ready for us to shred, and it is just falling apart. As you can see, it's already broken into 2 pieces. Looks absolutely delicious. Smells even better. Once you have that done, go ahead and grab your roux, bring it over, and you're going to stir that into your gravy. This is going to thicken up your gravy and make it absolutely delicious and a perfect topping for your roast. Once you have all of your roux into your crock pot, what I decided to do was to put the sauce, the gravy, back into the pot and turn it on low heat for a little bit, or I'm sorry, on high heat for a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, just to thicken up the gravy really good and make it yummy and delicious. So that's what we're going to do now. I started by ladling a little bit into the pot. I thought I would, or into my saucepan. I thought I would just ladle it in, and then I realized that really wasn't working very well. So I ladled some in, and then I took it over to the stove and I poured in the rest. I just didn't want to pour the whole thing. It's very hot and I didn't want to risk picking it up and dropping it. So I ladled in as much as I could. Then I poured in the rest. And now we're just going to pop this onto high heat for a few minutes and let that thicken up. Okay, it's time to go ahead and doctor up our potatoes. So first things first, I'm mashing our potatoes with a metal potato masher. And these I find work the best. I used to have a plastic one and it was such a pain in the butt to clean. This is so much easier. I like mine pretty rustic. I definitely don't like a whipped mashed potatoes, so I'm not going to make them really, really smooth, just smooth enough. And I'm going to add in about 1.5 sticks of butter for now. And my trick is that I just will add seasoning, taste it, come back, add some more, do it again until I get it just right. So I'm starting off with this amount of butter, stirring it in so that it can start to melt. I do have my heat off, so I'm not burning my potatoes, and just letting the heat of the potato melt the butter. It's so hot there, I can barely get it back into the pot. And then we're going to start to season it up. So I like to season mine with garlic powder and Lowry seasoned salt, and then a little bit of heavy cream. And typically I would also put in a little bit of sour cream. However, I was actually out of sour cream. So in today's video for our mashed potatoes today, we are just going to do some garlic powder and then some Lowry seasoned salt and some pepper. And we're going to come back in with a little bit of heavy cream. So like I said, my trick for, seasoning up our mashed potatoes is just to season, taste, and decide what it is that you like. You can't take the seasoning out once you've already put it in. So make sure that you taste it before you add a whole bunch of something, because it can definitely, overpower your potatoes. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit of regular salt. Then we're going to add in some garlic powder right now. I do put a pretty decent amount. Potatoes are really bland and they're very starchy, so they need a lot of seasoning. So don't be afraid. In fact, I actually go back in and add a little bit more. And then when I'm done seasoning up, I will top it with a little bit more butter, put the top back on so that will melt, and they'll be good to go. The last thing for us to do is to shred up our beef. So I'm just taking 2 forks and I am shredding up our beef roast. Some people prefer to have their roast cubed. You could do that too. You could use stew meat when you're making your roast. I like mine shredded. And this recipe doesn't call for carrots. However, my husband did say afterward that he prefers my roast with a carrot. I do have a different roast recipe that I use that is definitely not one for me to show on camera just because it's literally just a dump and go. Maybe I'll put it in a Sunday reset. But that one has carrots. But this one doesn't call for carrots. I like this one. It tastes more like a Madeira sauce, almost like a wine sauce, even though it's not. But we're just going to shred up our meat and then we're going to plate up our food and it's going to be time to taste.
Okay, my friends, our dinner is finally done. Here is my bowl. I'm ready to go ahead and give it a try. I'm gonna do a little bit of mashed potatoes, a little bit of beef, a little mushroom. Get the perfect bite. Creamy and salty and yummy and delicious and warm and cozy. Next up, my favorite Brussels sprouts. So very good. And nothing finishes off a delicious cozy meal like some soft bread and butter. All right, my friends, that is it for today's Foodie Friday Cook With Me. I hope that you found this cozy meal easy and time-saving and delicious. If you decide to try this recipe, I would love to have you tag me. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at Charlotte Grove Farmhouse. And until next week, happy eating.